Hey, I'm Brian Van, SportbikeTrackHere.com. Today we're going to break down the Woodcraft clip-on install on our 2022 STG Yamaha R7 project bike. What are clip-ons and why do I need them? Well, in my hand here, I have one of the OEM clip-ons that we removed from the bike. You can see this is a one-piece unit. One of the main reasons to replace these, if you have any kind of tip over at the track or even on the street with these, it's gonna typically break here. If it bends here, you have to replace the whole unit. In order to replace the unit, you have to remove the top triple clamp. It's a lot of work. Your Woodcraft units, or any other aftermarket for that matter, are going to allow for very easy replacement of just the clip-on bar tube. Super easy to do. This is a must-have modification for the racetrack. Tools that were used on this. You're going to need a set of Allens, right? I used a set of T-handles. You need a socket. I used 1 1/16" here. I think that might equate to 30 millimeters. I used a torque wrench to torque down the upper pinch bolts to 19 foot-pounds. I used a torque wrench to torque this down to 85 foot-pounds, so it was a 1/2 inch and a 3/8 inch torque wrench. I used an air compressor to remove and reinstall the grips. You don't necessarily need to have an air compressor to do that. There's other ways to get it done. So in the end, very basic hand tools and a lot of patience. Okay, we're gonna begin this install by removing the upper and lower fairing. It's just gonna get us better access. You're gonna be able to see what we're doing better. We just finished the installs for our bodywork. Check out our channel and or our website. It's giving you another look at this amazing graphic job my buddy Reese Briotti did over at REB Graphics. Okay, now that we have that out of the way, we can go in and dive into the actual install. Need to pull off the Driven Racing carbon brake lever guard that we installed. One of our earlier install videos. We need to pull the grip off of this side. To remove the grip, I'm going to use a little blowgun action. We're going to replace them. That's why I'm pulling it off. Need to pull the bar end on the other side here. Can't remember what size that is. It's 5 or 6. It's a 5. If you're not replacing your grips, you would not need to pull the one off the throttle side, obviously. Off it comes. That all over to the side. This back over here in case we need to raise the table. So what's next? Next up, we can go ahead and loosen up our throttle housing. Gotta grab a 3mm T-handle. Go ahead and separate the halves of the throttle housing. See, Motion Pro has released a part number now for Revolver 3 quick turn throttle. Definitely will be looking to add that to this bike. Doesn't appear that it's available right now. We're gonna have to wait a minute and try and reach out to them, flip them an email or something, see when that bad boy is coming. We've used those on all of our previous bikes, like that part quite a bit. OEM start-stop switch. That's a Phillips screwdriver that I'm using there. Like so. And then we've got our Brake Master 5mm internal hex. I think for the first ride we're going to try and get that ABS eliminated, get some new brake lines coming from our friends at Spiegler. I'm going to run the stock Master for the first ride, get a little suspension. Probably need a slipper clutch, work on getting that done. Definitely got to have a slipper. I'm going to need every possible advantage if I'm going to have any hope of keeping up with that kid. It's a 4mm internal hex to install the Woodcraft Clip-Ons and or the Woodcraft key switch eliminator. Right, we're pulling off our top triple, okay? We have to do that for both, so you're gonna hear me probably throughout this video kind of make reference to both of the installs. That's because I'm not gonna pull the top clamp twice, just doesn't make sense to do that. The procedure is identical. So just know that that is what's happening. Okay, so now we've got, gonna get a little flat-bladed screwdriver, pop those plugs out. Right there. Those fasteners are used in the alignment of the OEM clip-on bars. So if you're watching this and you're wondering, why are you replacing one set of handlebars with another? A couple of reasons for it. The single biggest one being ease of bar replacement, right? If you happen to have a little tip over, it happens on the racetrack. It's unfortunate, but it's a reality. The Woodcraft clip-ons and most aftermarket clip-ons for that fact offer much easier bar replacement. When you damage an OEM clip-on, you have to replace the entire unit, which involves removing the top triple clamp, and that's something that you don't want to have to do that at the racetrack. Steering stem nut. Go ahead and loosen that. Now we can loosen the pinch bolts on the top triple, as well as the pinch bolts that retain the OEM clip-on. Those are 6mm internal hex. Really felt like a lot for a fastener that's only supposed to have 19 foot-pounds of torque. It's weird. Okay, those are loose. Steering stem bolt, or actually nut, just the cap nut, is now off. Should be able to, let's grab that washer. Little pressure from the forks to the steering stem. That's normal. Okay, now we're going to have to find the end of the harness for the ignition switch. And there's also a bracket at the throttle cables and the clutch cable are running through. Let's go ahead and get our cables off of that. Our brake switch harness runs through over here. We need to get that out of there. See if I can get a pair of needle nose pliers. Get in there and release that. Some of this is hard to give you guys a good angle on. Do the best we can. There it is. Okay. Looks like we've got a cable tie there that needs to be cut. Grab a pair of side cutters. And brake light switch. That bad boy is going to be, we'll disconnect that as we go through this. Got your harness there for the OEM start stop switch. That needs to stay. We're going to be able to eliminate the switch pod here on this side. So let's find the end of that ignition switch. Harness. Okay, looks like we're going to need to get some good access here. We're going to have to pull off at least the tank cover, right? And we'll do that now, and we'll probably not show that in the clip-on portion of this video, so we're going to have a quick cut. Next up, over here on the brake side of the bike, we're going to go ahead and loosen up the pinch bolt for the OEM handlebar. Like so. Lift that up, slide that off, put this over to the side, and then we're going to have our clutch side we need to disassemble. Going to need a Phillips screwdriver, a 6mm internal hex. We're going to need an 8mm quarter drive socket on a quarter drive ratchet to deal with the clutch perch. These are Phillips screws. This switch pod will not be reinstalled on the bike. Kind of throw the screws back in there for placeholders. Looks like the harness for the horn, which we're also going to remove from the bike, is included in this switch pod harness. You know what I just realized? I'm an idiot, and I'm going to need to pull the fuel tank cover back off the bike because I can't get that harness out of there. Damn it. Okay, so the switch pod, right? The right switch pod that is not going to be reused. You can see I've got the horn, right? There was a 10 millimeter hex fastener that held the horn on. That is pulled off now. I'm just kind of leave that hang on this harness. We're going to go ahead and get the clutch switch unplugged from that, right? Just pull those terminals out. Now we need to gain access to the connector itself for that switch pod. I'm hopeful that I can just pull one side. You probably already heard me say earlier, I'm an idiot. I already had this cover off. That's because we're doing 2 installs in one and we're trying to film the overlap sections together. 3 internal hex fasteners, 4 millimeter, 2 coarse, 1 on the front edge, 1 on the back, and then here in the center. Grab this panel right about here, and I want you to pull out and kind of rotate like so, and it's just going to unclip itself. And now let's look in here. Let's see if we can get this done without pulling the fuel tank, right? Okay, now let's go ahead and get a pair of side cutters. We got to cut the cable tie up here that holds that harness in place. Like so. Okay, now let's see where we're at here. Well, look at that. Looks like we're going to be good to go, and you won't have to pull the entire fuel tank to facilitate this. Because realistically, if you're putting clip-ons on, right, there's no reason to leave that switch pod. Release that connector, and the second one. Like so. Let's kind of tuck those connectors out of the way. We're going to have this all apart again for different stuff as we continue to track prep it, so probably not going to show you really tidying all that stuff up right now because it just kind of doesn't matter. But there is the switch pod from the left side of the motorcycle that we are not going to carry forward. You do have a wire tie right up here. We're going to put that back in, kind of replace the cable that we cut. What you need to do here will be pretty self-explanatory. It's kind of tight to show it, but when you're doing your own project, you're going to see what you need to do in there. You're just replacing the cable tie, sliding it through a groove that is in an anchor. It's already there. Once you get that secured, just gotta get in there and cut the tail off. All right, now we can grab the fuel tank cover half, slide that back on. What you want to do is you want to get it lined up, lift up, push in, and then make sure that you compress it enough that all the clips are engaged. You'll know that you've got it when the body line is nice and tight. You can go ahead and put those 3 fasteners that we showed you back in there. Go ahead and remove the OEM bar from the clutch side of the bike. 8mm hex fastener here for our clutch perch. 6mm internal hex for the pinch bolt. Off it comes. What you can do here too is you can grab a little baby Phillips, get that bad boy out of there. I don't know if that's a number 2 or 1. Let's see here. No, that's a 2. You want to put a little in, this is a number 2 Phillips I'm using here, stubby. You want to put a fair amount of pressure on this. They use some thread locker on these. And if you don't push down hard enough, all you'll end up doing when you pull these little switches out is just literally just tearing the head right off. Like so, a little bit cleaner. On the brake side, you can do the same thing and pull that switch. May as well do that right now. You know, if you prefer, you could leave it on. Ultimately, what will end up happening to this bike is we will be running a different switch, right? We'll probably put the Motion Pro start-stop switch, or maybe one of the Woodcraft ones. The Woodcraft one's pretty badass. It's probably the one I'll go with. Probably be doing that, and there will be no provision for this, so let's go ahead and pull that. You know, and something that you can do here too is, you know, maybe get some electrical tape and just kind of tidy that up. Personal preference. Probably going to do it real quick. Okay, so now we've got that done. We are ready to, and you could put your top triple on now, right? You could put your clip-on clamp cuffs on. I do believe he now has these marked right and left, I think. Nevertheless, what you want to do is you want to make sure that they're mounted in such a way that the downward angle of the clip-on tube is facing outward. we've done that here. The face with all the engraving is the one that's going to go up. Okay, and I kind of just bolted all that together very loosely. Okay, top triple. Let's go ahead and slide that back over our fork tubes. What you want to do now is you want to make sure these fasteners are loose. What you're going to notice right now is, oh no, look at that. The steering stem is not lining up with the hole. What do? What we're going to do is we're going to put a little bit of downward pressure and we're going to go like so, okay? Just a little tug. Washer, other washer, steering stem nut. That's exactly the way it all came off. Torque spec for this is 85 foot-pounds. What we're going to do is just very easily get it to seat here. Put just a little bit of torque to it. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to put just a tiny little bit of torque to these. These are going to ultimately go to 19 foot-pounds. So 85 for the steering stem nut, 19 for these. And as I tighten down that top triple, I just want everything kind of held in place. That little bit of torque that I put there is going to help do that for us. Let's come over and grab the torque wrench. Start off with the 1/2 inch. We're going to set this to 85 foot-pounds. Like so. $85 it is. Socket we're using there is 1 1/16 inch. It fit perfect. Obviously this bike would be metric. Can't remember what 1 1/16 inch is. Maybe it's 30 millimeters. Sounds right. Could be wrong. 6 millimeter internal hex. We need to set this to 19. These numbers are tiny, tiny little numbers. $19 foot-pounds. So what we're going to do here, okay, is remember I put just a tiny little bit of torque on these. Backing that off now. That way, let's say that even the slightest little bit, that when I torqued that the rest of the way, we had it seated and then I torqued it the rest of the way. Let's just say that when I loosen these, maybe it could pull itself down just a little bit. That's why I did that. So we'll go ahead and just get them to seat again after having loosened them. And now we'll grab our torque wrench, which was set to the official number of 19 foot-pounds. $19 foot-pounds. All right, Now the clip-on cuffs. Okay, so one thing that is very important with this or any other clip-on cuff that is split like this, it's in two halves, you want to make sure that when you have this all torqued down, that the gap between the two halves is as even as it can be. Okay, so a method that I've kind of landed on is using a 2mm Allen wrench, right? Because that is with the Woodcraft clip-ons, that has kind of over time, I've identified that as kind of the gap that seems to be the most accurate. Those are not very tight at all, right? Enough that they're even, and I'm still able to pull that out. Now, the ones on the back side here are much more easily accessible, right? So now, kind of begin to set that up a little bit. We're going to go over to the other side, do the same exact thing. Okay. I do have some different clip-on alignment tools that I will use to help set the angle, right, as we go deeper in through this process. Now, over here on the throttle side, we're going to have a couple of things that we need to deal with, okay? Your OEM throttle housing has an alignment hole, and also the OEM switch pod has an alignment hole. When we come back, we're going to identify where to drill those holes and what size those holes should be. So we first need to land on the bar length and the location for the OEM throttle. We're going to use a lever guard on this, and it's really important, right, that you make sure that you're going to have enough of a gap between the end of the bar itself and the lever guard. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that we've got just enough that there's no way that that grip could be grabbing on the lever guard or even the spacer, right? We're going to end up using this spacer in the end too, which does get us a little more room to work with. Snug that up. We're going to pull the bar end out of the Woodcraft tube because we're not going to use it. Usually save these in case you have a little tip over on the other side. You just scratch it. And then you're going to see that that adapter is basically, right, the same outer diameter as the clip-on tube itself. And this is going to be different for every lever guard that you're going to use. But just make sure that you go ahead and you go through these steps to ensure that you don't put yourself in a position where if you have a lever guard that bolts right to the end of this, where you could have the throttle tube or the grip itself rubbing against that lever guard and sticking. You never want to be in a position where a throttle could possibly stick. So what we're going to do here is to identify the end of the throttle housing accurately. Just going to use a piece of tape. Like so. Run that around. And now we can take the bolt sluice Had those snugged up just enough to kind of hold it in place lightly. Let's go ahead and take the 5 mil here. Loosen that up so we can get the tube out. Now, you can see literally this is just the inside of that tape line. So I'm going to put this back in there. I'm going to snug this up. Now, if you're using something like the Motion Pro, this is not going to be a concern. Use a 3/16 drill bit. So what you want to do is identify about where the center point needs to be. Like so. Go ahead and loosen that up. This is a spot where if you're using these OEM controls, you want to take your time, man. Let's get a blowgun, blow some of the chips out. You want to take your time and make sure that you get this dialed in just right and you don't have any conflict in this area. No possibility of that throttle sticking on anything. I cannot stress enough how important this is, right? This has to be right. Let's go ahead and push that through. Look at that. Super nice. Okay, now can snug these up a little bit. To hold that throttle assembly in place. Go ahead and slide your bar in. Where I will normally leave a bar is I'll normally leave it as long as possible. The most leverage that way. So I'm going to have the plug at the end of the bar, right at the very end of the clip-on cuff. Not concerned about the switch pod at all right now. The next most important thing is going to be mounting the brake. And this will all just be mocked up loosely. Okay, the reason I'm doing it in this order, okay, is it's going to be about the relationship between the throttle and that brake. You need to make sure that you have the throttle positioned in such a way that you're able to, get the lever position, the angle of the lever that you want and you prefer, and you don't have the throttle housing in the way of doing that. And it looks like, I'm probably going to have it down here somewhere. So, with this throttle could go in either direction just a little bit. Now let's go ahead and take a quick look at the switch pod. Need a little more space there. I think with the throttle, what I would want to do is have the cables probably up in that position to make sure that, you're not going to have any, I think that looks pretty good right there, any interaction between the lever and that. The lever fades a little bit. That all looks pretty good. So now what we're going to do is we're going to run with that right there. Go ahead and take the switch pod off for just a second. The brake master can come back off. Pull that out of the way. Now we want to identify where that switch pod is going to end. We'll do that. We'll mark that with a piece of tape like we did previously. I think that's going to be pretty good. Okay, now there is the locator, right, for that. You can see that pin right there. You can see about how inboard it is. You could do this a couple of different ways. You could measure, right, from the center of this to the edge of that, right? That'd be one way to do it and probably the easiest way. So I'm going to grab a quick scale. And let's see how many millimeters that is. It's basically 5 millimeters to the center. This is located right in the center of that. So what we want to do is, how do I want that switch to look? I think I want that switch probably rotated just a little forward. So let's grab our center. It's a 3/16 bit. So we're gonna grab a 7/32 drill bit. Right, we started off with a 3/16. So the 3/16 worked for the throttle, which wasn't quite big enough for the switch pod. Let's just see if we got it here. Look at that. Not bad, not bad. You definitely have a little bit of wiggle room to work with here. The most important thing is going to be making sure that under no circumstances you do anything that could cause that throttle to bind. So anytime you're working on the controls over on the right side of the bike, you will always need to be cognizant of that. That, above all, has to be right. There is just no compromise that is acceptable there. Okay, from here, we can go ahead and probably gonna put that up against the fork tube. We're gonna have a little bit, you know, because we've changed some routing and stuff here. You know, this is something we'll have to tidy up a little bit as we continue through the process. We want to decide which side of the brake line do I want that harness on. Do I want the harness inboard or outboard of the brake line? Let's kind of mock that up. I'm feeling like we're probably going to leave it for now. I think I'm going to leave it inboard, and then we'll secure it against the fork tube. Something that's very important here. This, see the arrow up? That has to be installed that way. And when you torque this down, we'll cover this again as we get a little deeper into the video and tighten all this stuff up. That upper fastener gets snugged and tightened first. And then all of the real tension that is put on the brake master is done using the lower bolt. Kind of show you here what I'm talking about. So you can still move that. So the clamping force all comes by closing the gap at the bottom. The bottom never fully seats against the other half, the master half. All right, we're to a point now where I'd like to identify a starting position for the angle of our clip-ons. How am I going to determine where to start? Well, we're going to take the OEM clip-on. We're going to kind of hold it in position there. This is where it would be bolted up from the factory. I want to look here and try and get these to be kind of parallel with one another. Pretty close there. And then we're going to find a reference point on this upper triple clamp that would be identical on both sides. There's kind of a machined surface here on the clip-on. That looks really close, right? Do something like that. I do have tools that I'll use to ultimately measure this, right? But this is going to be our starting point right there. Now let's go ahead and grab a 5mm Allen. We can begin to torque these down. This is not something I would use a torque wrench for. If you feel more comfortable performing this with a torque wrench, by all means, now's a great time to grab one and do that. For this project, we're going to be moving these around. So I'm going to get them to a position that I think is going to be a reasonable starting point. Then once we get them completely dialed in, I will come back and make sure that everything is evenly torqued. Let's go ahead and put our reservoir mount back on. It's going to end up being a long video. I mean, I think this is going to give you guys a sense that, you know, installing a set of aftermarket clip-ons, it's a little bit of a project, man. I mean, you're going to, you know, when you tackle this, this is going to take a minute. And, you know, you want to be committed to getting yourself a good end result. The controls are an area where you just simply, you don't want to compromise at all. The final outcome has to be essentially perfect. Let's go ahead and slide this into position, grab the other fastener. See if we can't get that started. That's a 4mm internal hex. Okay. Just going to double check my throttle. Make sure we've got that torqued. That's good to go. Let's make sure the clip-on tube is torqued. Now the brake master itself, you want to have the upper one snugged up a little bit, the lower one loose. This allows you to rotate it around. And we will fine-tune this, of course, quite a bit. Good starting point. We need to put the brake lever guard on, and then we'll go over to the other side and mount up the clutch side. Okay, we're still using the OEM throttles. We're going to put that plastic washer in there. Let's go ahead and grab one of the grips we're going to throw on. Depending on the grip and the application, like I'm ultimately going to end up gluing this one on, but for right now, let's just use a little compressed air. And get this thing slid over. And then we can move on to the brake lever guard. You want to make sure that when you're done, that the grip is all the way over the throttle tube and that you don't have any real pressure that is going to restrict the return of the throttle. So we'll fiddle with this for a minute, and when we come back, we'll be putting the brake lever guard on. Okay, so now we're going to install the brake lever guard. You can see we've got the grip is right to the very end of the throttle tube. Super important, right? We're going to take these back off and glue these, but for the purpose of this video. Now installing the brake lever guard. Full disclosure, one thing I will let you know, we had to on the bench grinder, remove just a little bit of material from one of these wedges. We've run into this previously. So it'll slide all the way into the Woodcraft clip-on tube. There's many different styles of lever guards that are available out there, right? They all mount up a little bit differently. You know, the one that we have on the bike, this carbon-driven guard, we had to make a little mod. You may not have to do anything to yours if you're running a Woodcraft lever guard. Those mount up totally differently. Get that to start. Okay, now we'll go over to the clutch side of the bike and begin assembling that side. All right, over onto the clutch side, we're going to take and slide the clip-on tube through our clutch perch. A lot easier here. We're not dealing with any locator holes. All we've got to deal with here is our clutch perch, and then of course the grip. So let's go ahead and get the bar. We got the clip-on bar torqued down a bit, enough to hold it into position. We're now going to come over here and kind of eyeball the other side. And let's get the angle even. Make sure your clip-on cuffs are all the way up against the bottom of the upper triple. And we're going to come back, we're going to fine-tune all of this, okay? Let's put enough torque on this that these aren't going to move. Grab our grip. Let's go ahead and get that started. And what I want to do with this is get this right to the end of the bar itself, right where the bar end starts, right there. $8mm socket on a quarter drive ratchet to snug up the clutch perch. Quick sweeps of the bars to make sure that everything is good. We don't have any conflicts, nothing's making any contact. Now from this point, there is a lot of fine tuning that needs to go on. You're going to want to secure the wiring harness here for the on-off and start switch. I need to tie that down over in this area because remember, we also installed the Woodcraft key switch eliminator. So there is a lot of fine tuning that needs to happen. That stuff, I don't need to show you that on camera. You're going to go through that process yourself once you get your bar angle set, you get your controls all set to your liking, right? Go and apply final torque to everything and make sure that you've got them torqued properly. What I've also found is after the first ride, you're going to want to circle back and double check the torque on the clip-on cuffs. What I have seen is it's not uncommon when they're installed for the very first time, right, that they may move just a little bit. Just double check the alignment and double check the torque after the very first ride. When we come back, I'm going to have all this stuff secured. We're going to have the bodywork back on the bike and make sure that we don't have any interference between the controls and the bodywork. Okay, you can see bodywork's back on the bike. We've got our angle is set. A lot of fine tuning, right? This is the point where you're gonna wanna get your clip-on angle, your bars, everything set up to suit your riding style. Double, triple check all your torque, make sure everything's good. And also very important, sweep the bars. Make sure that you don't have any conflict between your controls and the bodywork. The most important thing you're gonna do is you're gonna make sure that you have a good, strong throttle return, that you didn't do anything over in this area that is going to cause that to hang up. I think it's pretty clear watching this, right? And Lucas is going to do his best to edit this clip-on install down to show just the things that you need to see. There's a lot of things to consider, right? This is a project and there's a lot of variables that'll be thrown in. What type of throttle are you using? Do you have a quick turn throttle that does not use a locator pin? Are you using a different on-off switch that doesn't use a locator pin? That would remove a couple of steps. Are you doing something different with your brake reservoir? Lots of variables. Take your time, make sure it turns out perfect, and also, like I said previously, after your first ride, come back, double check your alignment, and make sure that the torque on the clip-on cuffs is still right where it needs to be. If you have any questions, leave those in the comments section of this video. I answer all that stuff myself. I'm always here to help make sure you get the same result from your project we do ours.